Let's see, is it 5:02? I think I'll begin then, if that's all right with everyone. I want to welcome you all. This is a webinar sponsored by the Academic Engagement Network, which is on 250 campuses and is mainly composed of professors and a few administrators on many of those campuses. And we're delighted today that President Joseph Castro is with us, Joe to me. Joe is someone I've admired for a long time. He's a man who has experienced many different parts of higher education, from the University of California at Santa Barbara to University of California at San Francisco. He's knowledgeable about medical matters. He's knowledgeable about social science and many other things. Joe is I think, a terrific new leader for the Cal State system. The thing I would call most attention to is the spectacular job he's done at Cal State Fresno. When you look at matriculation rates and graduation rates and the steps Joe and his many able colleagues have taken to make the campus welcoming, particularly to students of color, low-income students. He's just done a marvelous job. And when you look around America, with very few other institutions, I think Joe, often guided by Chancellor White, has been remarkable in terms of the innovation that has taken place on that campus. He and I serve on the Lumina Foundation board together. We've been friends for many years. And like in myself, I never quite understood why he wanted to be president of anything, but he did, and I did. That's the way it rolls. So with that, and he has a Stanford PhD, but I do not hold that against him. I want to make that very clear, that I've known some good people with Stanford PhDs, and he's among the very few. So Joe, with that, we'd like you to say a few words, and then mainly it's to tap your expertise. I mean, you've had earthquakes, and you've had fires, and you've had protests, and you've had civil rights movements, and of course you're facing budget exigencies and so forth. So California, including the Fresno campus, have been through a great deal, and I feel you can bring some expertise to help guide the rest of us. So with that, my friend Joe Castro.
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon or good evening to everybody. I appreciate this opportunity to engage in a dialogue with you about all matters higher education, and I'll make some brief remarks as Mark just said. I do want to just say Mark has been a friend for a long time, and I consider him a mentor as well. He's a master of the presidential craft, in my opinion. And I still remember, Mark, some of the conversations we had as I was thinking about whether to try to be a president. And I remember one story, he said to me, "This is going to be a really hard job, Joe. The best part of it is when you get to call your mother and tell her that you've received the job, and then it gets extraordinarily hard after that." And I've always remembered that, and we've kind of bonded over our mothers. I would say that he prepared me for much of what I encountered after that conversation. So Mark, I appreciate that very much. And if my comments resonate with you tonight, please give him some credit. And if they don't, you can hold me solely responsible for what I'm about to say. I'm here in Fresno, California, on the campus of California State University, Fresno. For those of you who know California, the San Joaquin Valley is in the middle of it, the inland part of California. It's the national and worldwide hub for agriculture. And our university is in its 110th year. So it has very deep roots in the community. And as Mark said, we're one of the nation's most successful universities in terms of social mobility, which is one of the major reasons why I serve as a university president, is the opportunity to help transform the lives of students. And to give you some context, the leading feeder school district for our campus is Fresno Unified School District. It's one of the largest in California. 1/5 of those students live in public housing. That will give you some context for the socioeconomic situation. And that means that the stakes are quite high, not just for this campus, but for the CSU. We have over 25,000 students here at Fresno State, over 70% first generation to college, and over 80% students of color. I serve primarily large numbers of Latinx students, mostly children or the children of immigrants or immigrants themselves, hundreds of DACA students. As you can imagine, they are feeling some sense of relief over the last few weeks. And I also serve a large number of Southeast Asian students who are mostly Hmong, and their parents came here from Southeast Asia and settled here. And most of them have a socioeconomic profile that's very similar to the Latinx students that I serve. In fact, my top graduate last year was a young Hmong man who was, I think, one of 7 or 8 children, first in his family go to college, achieved almost a 4.0 GPA, and was on his way to medical school. And then his father became ill. So he decided that he was going to defer medical school to take care of his father. And I said to him, he's going to be a great doctor someday because he had great instincts in terms of staying home to take care of his father. But he exemplifies the resilience that I see each day, not just on my campus, but across the CSU system. And as Mark mentioned, I'll be leading that system as of January 4th. And that's the nation's largest public university system. We serve almost 500,000 students. And I believe it's one of the most consequential universities in the country because of the diversity of our talented students. Today, I'd like to share some brief thoughts with you about COVID, the impact of COVID, and a couple of other areas that Mark thought might be of interest to you. And then most importantly, I'm looking forward to a dialogue with you. So I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. I'm speaking now at a time when I believe we're amidst the probably the hardest part of this pandemic. The next 8 weeks are going to be the most difficult as far as I can tell. Our COVID test positive rates were 2% just a few weeks ago in our community, and now they're this morning 14, 15%. My health friends tell me that we're headed for 30+% in the coming weeks. So I anticipate very rough waters here as universities like ours try to finish the semester and get ready for a new semester in the spring. And these challenges that we're going to face over the next 8 weeks actually might make the other challenges we faced earlier in the pandemic pale by comparison. And there is no leadership rule book for this time, in my opinion. I believe that it's imperative that we stay focused on our mission and on our values and to be open to new strategies and tactics. One of the lessons for me is to not, put it this way. I have found that solutions that seem quite unreasonable on one day might be optimal a day after or a week after. And so I think it's important for us to be flexible on the strategies and tactics. In March, like so many other universities around the country, we pivoted from being a campus that was about 90% traditional instruction, in-person instruction, to about 90+% virtual. And that's where we're at right now. That's where most of the CSU is at, with a few exceptions. And as you probably know, as faculty members, this was very stressful for everybody, including our faculty and staff and students. And that stress has accumulated over time. I see it in the fatigue that some people have. some frustration, and even despair. And as I talk with students and faculty about, and staff about their mental health challenges. Some of our faculty have struggled professionally to try to figure out how to deliver their courses in this way. We've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars on this campus and millions across the CSU in helping our faculty, supporting them with new tools to make their courses even more engaging than ever before. And we'll be doing that again this winter, and I'm confident that we'll continue to do it next summer as well. Most of the students that I serve have really struggled, and I know in America there are some students that might be frustrated about virtual education, but they haven't struggled economically. Most, if not all of my students have struggled financially. We've distributed millions of dollars in emergency grants on this campus alone, expanded our food pantry and even deliver food to students at their homes as needed, provided housing to homeless students, and we've invested very importantly in technology. So we distributed over 8,000 iPads and mobile hotspots on this campus alone, and as you can imagine, much larger numbers for our system as each of the campuses has tried to deal with this particular challenge. From a financial perspective, the CSU system itself has lost over $1.1 billion during COVID in both state and in our auxiliary, which are nonprofit kind of enterprises that support the university, housing, dining, event centers, parking, those kinds of things. On this campus alone, we lost over $34 million. And I know you're seeing it in different ways at your campuses, but for us, a $34 million cut at this campus, where we charge the lowest tuition and fees in all of California, about $6,000 plus a year, that's a big cut in funding. And that was due to the changes in the state economy and also to the restrictions on the number of people that could be on the campus. And so we had to downsize our auxiliary enterprises significantly over this time. The federal government, as you know, has helped with CARES funding, providing about $300 million to the CSU system to help kind of balance out some of those losses. But we've also had increased costs, and so we've needed to use the CARES funding to deal with extensive cleaning, equipment, supplies, technology, testing. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on testing as well. I do believe that in the medium term, once we get a vaccine and can get out of the pandemic, that the auxiliary funding will eventually bounce back as more people are on campus. State funding, we'll see. Federal funding, I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get some more assistance there. Timing, hard to tell, but I know they're going to be back next week, and my hope is they can work out a deal and have another kind of a version of relief for higher education. Private philanthropy, interestingly, here has risen, and I've seen our donors really, they're very much interested in what they can do to help our students now to graduate in a timely way, very sensitive to the fact that this is a fragile situation. And my hope is, as Chancellor of the CSU, to try to double philanthropy in terms of giving over the next 3 to 5 years. In terms of cases, you've heard about examples of hundreds and thousands of cases at different universities. I've said to Mark privately how proud I am that we've kept our numbers relatively low. As of today, we have 46 cases at a large university like ours and no community spread. And that's because we've been getting a lot of great advice from our health partners. We're doing a lot of testing. We have an app, temperature checking. So each day I have to go through these stages just like everybody else, PPE in the classrooms, deep cleaning, all those kinds of things. And the region where I serve has a very fragile healthcare system. So the implications for our decisions here are very, very important and significant. So I've tried to make sure that we're very careful. We've even reintroduced football. We were able to play 4 weeks of football with no cases. And then unfortunately, we went to out of state to a university, played them, and we came back and have some cases, very, very unfortunately. My entire cabinet has been here working each day. We don't get together in rooms, but we are one team and modeling for everybody else. And we've had no cases among my team. So I'm very thankful for that. In terms of campus culture, as I mentioned, 90% of our community is not on campus each day. So that's had definitely a change in how we operate. We're doing a lot more virtual webinars like this, small meetings, large gatherings, forums, that sort of thing. And I found that those have been very effective. I believe that's one of the reasons why our enrollment is up by 5%, is we've been able to use technology to connect in a more personal way with students and families, answering their questions, hearing their concerns, trying to address them. And I think that we've been able to use technology in that way in a very positive manner. We've had 2 protests. One was around Title IX issues. The other was around protesting a statue we have of Gandhi here on campus. And in both cases, we organized ourselves to have panels of experts looking at these issues from different vantage points and allowing the campus and community to enter into dialogue about these issues. Our cross-cultural center has facilitated a large number of meetings as well for different students on different kinds of topics. As it relates to freedom of speech, which I know is very important to all of you and to me, I've had my fair share of free speech kinds of challenges here on this campus. You could find those by Googling. I had one professor who thought he was communicating just to his small group on Twitter that Trump should hang. And he said he was saying that from a scholarly perspective. As you can imagine, in an area like mine, which has a lot of red, that was a very unwelcoming message. I had another professor who tweeted on the evening of Barbara Bush's passing a whole bunch of things that were more than unkind, and that received a lot of attention from different people and media outlets. I think we had over 1 billion social media negative hits, mostly because of what she said. And then I had another professor who he said he was acting on my behalf. He wiped out chalked messages that anti-abortion activists on my campus had written and had authorization to have them on the campus. And he went and washed them away and asked other students to do the same. So I've had to navigate these issues. Each of these 3 professors is still employed, much to the chagrin of some of my community leaders who wanted me to fire them and wanted me to be fired because I didn't fire them. But I do believe in free speech, and I think it's very important that university presidents model that for their campuses, even if it's difficult. And I have to give credit to Mark because he's been very helpful and supportive of me in dealing with those kinds of issues. In each of those cases, I did condemn the specific language that was used in those cases. And we now have principles of community on our campus, which have been led by our faculty and embraced by the entire community. Looking ahead, I see unprecedented levels of innovation. I'm actually quite optimistic. I know that we've been innovating under stress. And what I think is going to happen is once we get through vaccines and a period, and I'll tell you, one of my closest health expert friends told me he thinks he might actually have the first batch of vaccines at his hospital as early as next week. He believes that 24 hours after the approval by the government that he will have them and they'll start the distribution. So we're getting close to the point where we're going to see some real activity in this area. And so we'll be able to do this work together without so much stress. And maybe that will look differently in the summer, and then in the fall, I'm optimistic that we'll be looking even more like we did in March. But I don't think we're going to head back. We're going to look differently. And I think that's going to be good for our students. Students that can't come to campus on a regular basis will have the option for virtual education. Faculty and staff who have other obligations might find that that's going to be better for them. And I anticipate that they're going to drive these changes. And as the next chancellor, I want to empower them to look for different kinds of strategies and use different tools so that we can be even more effective in serving our students. And I'm about ready to conclude. You might ask, well, why is the CSU such a consequential system? I would say it's not just because we're the largest, although that is important. I would say it's because of who we serve, the diversity, the first generation of college students that make up the majority of the students that we serve from all different racial and ethnic backgrounds. Many reentry students who come through the community colleges. We welcome the highest number of community college transfers on this campus in our history and in our system as well. And I think it's also because we know that we've lost something like 10 million jobs during COVID in our country. And about 3.6 million of those lost jobs are people that have been unemployed for over 6 months, which is going to make it very hard for them to be as successful as they want to be. And 5.5 million of those 10 million jobs have been lost by women, predominantly women of color, who can't experience the full benefits of the economy because of children, other obligations that they might have, or they were in industries that have been completely transformed. Those are the students that we serve, and those are the families that we serve. So that's why the CSU is so consequential right now. And I'm optimistic that together, during moments like this, universities like those in the CSU are going to make a powerful difference and transform the lives of students who might normally not have those opportunities. And it allows our faculty and staff to fully live out our bold mission, which is to educate and empower students for success. I appreciate the opportunity to share a few words with you today, and I'm excited to hear your questions and receive your feedback on these different ideas. And Mark, thank you again for inviting me.
My great pleasure, Joe. And I think, Rafa, you're in charge of the questions, if I remember correctly. That was terrific. It's even worse than when we talked 10 years ago. I never predicted an epidemic like this and some of the other things that you confront every morning. But you're holding up well, and you're not cranky, which is great.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, President Castro. And thank you to everyone who has joined us this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are. We are now ready to move into the Q&A portion of this event. The chat box is open. Please feel free to enter your questions there, and I'll try to ask as many as possible. If you'd like to send a question privately, please feel free to send it directly to me. I'm Rafa Shams, AAN's Director of Communications and Programming. So I would like to start with 1 to 2 questions from AAN's leadership team. President Castro, you discussed many of the challenges that college and university campuses have faced and will continue to face due to COVID. However, you hinted at some of this near the end of your remarks, but I was hoping you could go into a little bit more detail for the benefit of our participants. Do you see any areas in which the adaptations that campuses such as yours have implemented have created opportunities for increased growth and innovation and inclusion, whether we're talking about the faculty space or the student space or the administrative space.
Absolutely, yes. And the faculty who are part of this network and all around the country and beyond will have a lot to say about that. I mean, it really, in my opinion, the innovation is going to come from them, from you and the audience, and from our students. And presidents like me need to empower that, fund that, support that, cheerlead it. I have this great Center for Faculty Excellence here on our campus, which has been one of the most critical parts of our campus's programming, because they have provided tools for our faculty and designed programs that meet them where they're at. So for example, if you were a professor in March who had never ever done anything like this, then we had a curriculum for them. And then for those who might have been more in the moderate level or in the advanced level, we had tools for them. And the tools are getting better. So one of my priorities as chancellor is going to be to help better leverage those tools that the faculty and the students want and need. And I think we're going to see some incredible things when the stress of the pandemic has gone away. And there'll be more freedom for folks to come less often if they wish, or as often as they wish. If they want to come daily, that will be available. But I have a feeling in talking to many faculty and students that some number of them are going to say, you know, I don't need to go 5 days a week. I can do this from home, and it's going to make it easier for me. And what I've found personally is more time with my family has improved the quality of my life. And Mark will get this, all these evening events that university presidents historically have done, those have by and large gone away. And I suddenly have more time for my 9-year-old. And I think we're finding, in talking to faculty and staff and students, that that's a big plus here. So I'm optimistic. What it looks like exactly, I can't tell you. We'll know in the coming months and years, of course, but I'm very optimistic.
Great. We're starting to get in questions from our participants now. So one of them is, considering that study abroad has played such an important role in educating American students about the world outside the US, do you envision study abroad resuming at some point in the near future?
Absolutely, yes. I think it's so important for our students and faculty to learn about new cultures, and for our faculty here, I know at Fresno State, we've made it a priority to increase the number of students who study abroad, and also in different parts of the US, because so many of the students that I serve have really never left this region. And I remember that feeling as a 17-year-old when I was admitted to Berkeley, leaving a small town here in the Valley to go there. It felt like another country. So I've really endeavored to support our students in doing that with more scholarships and more flexibility. There's been a lot of innovation in that space. So it's not, you have to go for a whole year or a semester like it used to be in the past. And those options are not always possible for students that I serve. So shorter programs, I think those must continue. They're absolutely imperative. And I would do my best to support those through the CSU, just as long as we can do it safely. We have to ensure the health and safety is there. But once that's in place, and hopefully that would be by next fall, that we could resume doing those kinds of activities.
Thank you. So this is another question from AEN. In August of this year, Governor Newsom of California signed AB 1460, which mandates an ethnic studies course for all CSU students. Some have expressed concern that this requirement may have a negative impact on academic freedom and viewpoint diversity, and also that it reflects a fairly limited understanding of the role of ethnic studies. What are some of the ways in which you think this requirement can be fulfilled while still respecting academic freedom, viewpoint diversity, and the inclusion of students of all backgrounds, including Jewish students, in keeping with AB 1460's vision of an inclusive multicultural democracy? And keeping in line with our theme today, how will the implementation of this requirement be impacted by our COVID era reality of remote learning, physical distance, and constrained budgets?
I appreciate those questions about, this is a very important topic and is at the top of my list because we're implementing this new law right now. There are so many lessons to be learned from this experience. This is a less than ideal law, in my opinion. And I believe this happened because there was a sense in Sacramento, in the capital, that we weren't moving quickly enough to address their concerns for a whole variety of reasons. So we have this law. It has a traditional definition of ethnic studies. It reminds me of when I was a student in the 80s at Berkeley, and I benefited from courses that were defined in this way. However, I don't think it's a 2020 or 2021 version of the rich multicultural campuses that we have. And I know here at Fresno State, we have a very strong Jewish studies program, Portuguese studies, Italian studies, Armenian studies, and those are not included in this law. And I really wish they had been. And maybe someday this law would get amended. But until that happens, we're going to implement the law as it's written. And I believe that the other programs that are not necessarily covered by this law will continue to receive a lot of support, and students will want to continue to learn about these other cultures. So I think it's a lesson, and I've talked with the legislative leaders and the governor about this, and I hope that we won't repeat what happened with this particular bill that became a law.
Thank you. A somewhat similar question. This is from a faculty member at a Cal State campus. He says he loves being a part of a public university system, and one of his concerns is in welcoming the amazing and wonderful diversity at our university and across the system. He's concerned that Jewish students are often overlooked, that there's sometimes little done to address the concerns of a relatively small community as they face rising rates of anti-Semitism and misunderstanding across the nation. How do you anticipate addressing broadening diversity and inclusion efforts to improve the incorporation of Jewish students in the Jewish experience?
I appreciate that question. I think there is some truth to that. I think there's some unevenness, perhaps even within the CSU in this area. I know here in Fresno, we have a relatively small population of Jewish folks, but very committed. And I set up a Jewish Leadership Council, and they've helped me to strengthen our programs and recruit more students. I'd like to see that happen in a more robust way across the CSU. And I know we have some really great examples already. My hope is that as Chancellor, I can support and encourage that. And I think some of it has to do with the relationships that we develop with community leaders and visiting with community leaders in all settings and really understanding each other. So I'm optimistic that that will happen in the CSU, and I'd like us to be one of the models. And of course, Mark is always going to be, I hope, advising me so that if I accidentally make a mistake, he'll let me know. But I've learned a lot from him and others, and my intentions are to strengthen connections in that area.
Thank you. Now we have a bit of a more technical question, or a technical COVID-related question. This person is a faculty member, and there has been discussion with his the legal affairs team at his institution about the ability of universities to require vaccination of employees and students. They're requiring testing for staff and students who make regular contact, so to speak. Have you and your team discussed the scenario policy for vaccination when that becomes a possibility?
We have had this discussion. We haven't finished the discussion. I should be very transparent here as it relates to COVID testing. It was my intention earlier in the year to mandate it. And if I'd had my way, we would have mandated it for everybody on the campus who was going to be here for in-person instruction or to work. I was not able to get the union to agree to that. My faculty union opposed it. So therefore, I went to an inspiring approach instead of a requiring approach. We've been able to get about 70% participation. And my hope is that as things over the next 8 weeks, I think it's going to be very obvious that more testing is better. So I'm hoping that we'll get more participation. As it relates to vaccines, again, my instincts are that we ought to mandate it. I just don't yet know if we're going to be able to do that. And I do want to have that discussion as chancellor with our general counsel and with others, and see where the governor is, see where the University of California is. I hear they've been thinking about this as well. So my hope is that we could do that or try to inspire participation near 100%. And if you don't have the vaccine, then I suppose you wouldn't be able to come to campus.
You talked about some of the non-traditional characteristics of CSU Fresno. This faculty member is writing, we have seen some criticism of higher education that institutions that follow a more traditional model of teaching and engagement tend to unfavorably impact non-traditional students. Do you believe our response to the pandemic will lead to better consideration of how to support all students who may not fit our idea of a traditional student profile?
Absolutely. I think it's critical that we meet our students where they're at. That's what we've tried to do here at Fresno State, and that's what the CSU is committed to doing. And we've learned a lot during COVID. And that's, as I was saying earlier, I think students are going to respond differently and want more virtual options, some of them. Others are going to say, no, I need to have everything here. And I want to, we've created all these support structures physically here, and now they're away from that. So I know that some are going to want to come back to that. But we've learned so much in terms of delivery virtually. And my hope is that we'll continue that and really push the envelope. And it'll be easier for a rural student here. Let's say a dreamer who lives 40 miles from here, they don't have to come every day if they don't want to. If they can learn a lot of the material virtually, maybe they come to campus once a week or twice a week. And the same with a professor who, some have said to me, I'm actually more effective this way than I was before. And I'm learning so much about these tools. So I think it's going to be driven by them. And my hope is that each of our campuses will create that support structure so that the innovation can really, thrive.
Great. So now I want to combine two questions that have some related elements. One of the successes that Chancellor White pointed to on his appointment was his success with increasing the Black student attendance and graduation at his previous institution. What have been your successes or challenges with Fresno State's Black student admission, retention, and graduation? What lessons will you take with you from Fresno State about enhancing the educational experiences of Black students and increasing their campus presence? And what has been the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement on your university, on students, faculty, administrators?
The Black Lives movement is really, I believe, made a very positive difference here at Fresno State. Our students here have one of the very few NAACP student chapters in California. I think when I checked earlier this year, it was at Berkeley and here where they had that official status. And that group, very importantly, I've become very well acquainted with them. They led the community's protests right after the George Floyd situation, the murder there. And I was very proud of the way they did that. And it was peaceful. It was embraced by virtually everybody in the community. And it has led to some very positive things in our community. Had this not been COVID, I believe we would have had many more activities on the campus that were connected in that way. But because of COVID, it was in the community, and the largest protests in recent history here were led by our African-American students. So very proud of that. they've elevated the conversation with our faculty and staff here around these issues in our cross-cultural center. And I think it's also raised awareness about why are there not more African-American students at Fresno State? You know, why are there only 3% of our students here who are African-American? Why is the retention rate not the same as it is for white students? Because there is a slight gap and there's a couple point gap between African-American and white students on my campus. Why are there not more African-American faculty? You know, proudly, my cabinet has 3 African-American leaders, all very talented and strong, and they've helped me as well because you know, they've taught all of us more than we knew before, and I think that's really been for me the humbling experience, because I took African American studies at Berkeley as a student, learned a lot there, and I've learned over my career, and I continue to learn. And I think it's really important that we do that. So as I transition to be chancellor, I'm going to take that learning mode with me and try to do whatever I can to increase the enrollment and retention of African American students and the hiring and success of faculty and administrators. We certainly have much more work to do, and some campuses offer really great models for other campuses, and that's one of the benefits of our system, is that we can learn from each other. So again, I'm optimistic in that area. We do have a lot of work to do, and I'm proud of the progress we've made here. We have had recent increases, and I know that we can do even better in the future.
How will university research change post-COVID? And would you consider the level of intellectual exchange within and without classes still robust, given the pressures of some of these free speech controversies that you touched upon and what a lot of people call cancel culture on campuses?
Yeah, in terms of research, I do believe that, again, COVID has offered some new ways of looking at research, and I believe that we're going to go to a different place there that's going to be very exciting, and perhaps greater focus on health issues at universities like ours. You know, we were one of the first universities in California to step forward and agree to do testing with our county, and we've had a really strong partnership there. So I think there are going to be many opportunities. Our engineering faculty, one example, they did a great study on how to keep buses safe during COVID. What kinds of technologies cleaning technologies can be used to keep buses safe for people who need to ride it during this time. So I think there's lots of opportunities there, even for a university like ours. It's going to have more applied research in nature, as will be the case throughout the CSU. In terms of what's happening in the classroom, you know, I'm in an interesting place. On the day after President Trump was elected, I received a visit from a group of dreamers who were very scared about their future. Their families had told them that they probably needed to leave, and they were telling me that they were worried they needed to drop out. So in that conversation, I had to do everything I could to show them that no, they did not need to leave, that they're going to be supported here. And I took a lot of hits in my community for standing up for them. But of course, I'm going to do that every single day. My grandfather was a dreamer of his time 100 years ago. So of course, I'm going to support all students, including dreamers. But interestingly, I received a visit from students who supported President Trump, who said, I'm worried about being able to express my views in class during this time because my professors all hate him. And I knew that was not exactly the case. And what I've done is partnered with our academic senate leaders and our deans, our faculty, to really make sure that we are providing a high quality education that allows diverse voices to be expressed and opinions to be expressed. And we've sponsored events here on campus with different perspectives. I've tried to model that as president. And again, I think there is some of that, but I'd like to continue to work on it with the faculty. And I do believe that we're going to get stronger and better at welcoming diverse perspectives here on this campus and other campuses in the CSU.
How do you think the pandemic will impact nonprofit private universities? California has divided roles for the University of California, Cal State, and community colleges, which is an approach that is more than 50 years old. How well is that system working today from your perspective?
I think the system is working okay, but it can be improved. I would like to see more of the silos kind of broken down between the systems. And we've been, the governor asked us to model that here in the San Joaquin Valley. So for the last year or so, we've mounted an initiative with the K through 12 schools and the community colleges, all the different higher education segments. And we've focused on 3 sectors, education, business, and engineering. And we're creating these pathways that try to break through these silos. And I'm optimistic. I think it will be possible now for more students in the San Joaquin Valley, first generation of college students, to get their high school degree and their community college diploma degree, high school diploma and community college degree by the time that they're 18, and would then be able to transfer to us. And that may not even involve having them come to campus. It could be on a community college campus and get their degree, their bachelor's degree by the time they're 20, and could go to UC Merced and get a doctorate after that. So we're working on those pathways in a manner that I haven't seen in my career, and I'm hopeful about that. And I know that President Drake and Chancellor Oakley, the leaders of the UC and the community colleges, are open to that, and so is the leadership of the independent colleges and universities. So it's another place where I am optimistic. I think that California needs us to succeed, and the CSU is going to collaborate as they have with Chancellor White. I'm going to build from that, and I want to expand opportunities for California students. So I think the only way that can be done is by working together with the other segments. And I think there was a first part to the question as well. You remind me of that?
Yes. The impact of the pandemic on nonprofit private universities. Yeah.
Yeah, I do anticipate that's going to continue to be the case. I've seen that here in this region and in California, and I think it will require some creativity there on their part. Our university here, as I mentioned earlier, we have 5% enrollment increase. And what I was seeing is that students who normally might go elsewhere to a higher priced university, some of them decided to stay home and with us. And that was family driven. And we benefited from that. But I imagine that there were some places that didn't benefit from having that happen. So I do think it's textured. And if I were leading a private nonprofit, I would be thinking very creatively about how to ensure that there's a steady stream of talented students coming to me.
Given the tremendous fiscal challenges facing the CSUs and universities more general, what kinds of budget cuts can be made with minimal detrimental impact? And what hopes do you have for the infusion of financial assistance from the state and maybe even the federal government?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, we've had to cut about $1.1 billion out of the CSU. And here on my campus, you make sure I get that number right. I think it was 34 million. What I can tell you is that 34 million for us was a very difficult set of cuts. Part of it was really downsizing our management structure and thinking about how we were going to be organized going forward. And so we basically eliminated over 25 managers here on the campus. And then we looked to our operating budget, and we've squeezed that as far as we could with no travel, no events, that sort of thing. Again, we've been learning a lot about what we're spending money on. I think every university is. And then the goal was to preserve as many of our jobs as we could and to not affect the academic quality of our programs. And that's a hard thing to achieve with a cut of this magnitude, but we didn't touch our faculty in any way. We did have to make a small number of staff layoffs, and with retirements, we might be able to rescind some of those. I'm hoping that that'll be the case, but I'll know in the coming months. But probably over 25, 30 staff members as well have had to be laid off, but not directly connected to the classroom. And of course, no impact on our faculty. I hope that we can continue that. I hope the federal funding will come through, because that will help us to do some one-time things that might buy us, some time here and avoid more significant layoffs. I was lucky that I had enrollment growth, and therefore my revenue base was strong. Some universities are suffering from enrollment reductions, and coupled with a budget cut, that's a very difficult combination. So I know there are some campuses even in California that have had to do that, and they've had more layoffs. So it's a tricky thing, and the federal government can help us there. They could also help us with more support for Pell Grant students. And there is still a gap between the achievement of Pell Grant students and other students. On my campus, it's below 10%, but I'm trying to get it to 0, just like the CSU system is trying to get it to 0. And I think having more support for Pell Grant students will make a very positive difference.
So I think we have time for one more question, and I'll ask this, and this is something really relevant to the interest of a lot of our members. How would you rate the success of diversity and inclusion offices at Fresno and at other institutions that you may be familiar with? And what are the characteristics that make those offices successful?
That's a great question. In my experience, those offices or positions that are charged with that set of duties have not worked well. And therefore, I don't have a vice president for diversity and inclusion. I don't have a chief diversity officer here. My cabinet is extraordinarily diverse from all perspectives: gender, race, ethnicity. And I believe that we all have an important role to play, and me primarily, but supported by everybody else. The diversity and inclusion efforts on our campus are led day to day by a very senior level person who's well respected, but it's not necessarily just her job. She knows that. She knows that we are going to support her, but she leads my president's Commission on Human Relations and Equity, and we decide on programming that focuses in different areas. I've had my cabinet and other leaders go through regular programming, and as she says to us, you all are doing the work, the hard work of focusing attention on this area. And for me, that's been more successful than saying, I have a vice president of diversity and equity. And I've been looking for models where it has worked. I just have not seen it myself yet.
Okay, I think, Joe, thank you. That was so enlightening, and I really appreciate your candor. I always say presidents and chancellors give up First Amendment rights when they assume the office, but you and I are both aficionados of freedom of expression, and you certainly have expressed yourself freely on controversial and non-controversial topics. So I'm so grateful you were willing to do this. I think we all learned from what you had to say. And I wish you Godspeed at Fresno and in your new position. I guess you're moving to south. Are you moving south, Joe? Your headquarters?
Long Beach.
Long Beach.
in about a
Well,
month.
Okay, hope to see you on the beach there.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.